lot of OPEXEngine members on the line, as well as a number of new companies interested in taking a look at the benchmark data. So we normally do these webinars every month for our members and invited guests. And we also usually include participating companies in the benchmarking in the discussion. But this month, because we're presenting findings from our research, I wanted to focus on that. So just a quick housekeeping. Everyone's phones are on mute. If you hear an echo, try dialing in on a landline. Make sure that the sound of your computer's turned off. We encourage questions, so if anyone has questions, please send that in through the chat form. I'm seeing one or two people who are having problems with audio, but it sounds like most of the people are fine. I would suggest, again, trying to dial in with a landline. Sometimes the voice over internet doesn't work as well on these webinar programs because depending on how much is being used at your end. But again, send questions through chat, and also let me know through chat if you're having any other troubles. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lauren Kelly, CEO and founder of OPEXEngine. We started the SaaS and software benchmarking 10 years ago and work with hundreds of companies to help in the budgeting and planning process, as well as working year-round in operational management and improvement. Along with the OPEXEngine data platform that provides secure and confidential benchmarking for companies, we do quarterly research and deep dives into specific operational areas for our members. Most recently, we delivered to all our members an individualized compensation expense benchmarking report, comparing their comp and productivity metrics against peers and market leaders. So today, we're going to review at a high level some of those metrics and provide interpretation of key metrics. Let me just answer a quick question here on the audio. If anyone's having trouble, if you look at there should be a little icon that says audio. If you look at the drop-down, it'll give you a choice of dial by phone, and then you'll get the numbers there. Let me know if that helps or if you're having any more troubles. So a quick comment about the benchmark engine, because this is where the data for the compensation expense benchmarking came from. I just want to highlight it. It's a cloud-based platform to collect, clean, and present benchmarking reports. We look at financials, key performance metrics, as well as operational metrics for sales, marketing, R&D, professional services, and customer support, and G&A. We sort the companies into over 60 cohorts by size of revenues, ACV, even funding, whether they're venture-backed or not. And really, companies use it, and the goal of benchmarking is to help companies identify where they're strong and where they might need to improve performance and/or operations, as well as to analyze overall model and unit economics. So with that, I'll jump into the SAS Compensation Reporting, where the data coming out of the benchmark engine was the basis. And as I mentioned, subscribers recently received these detailed reports. And if you haven't seen your report yet, please contact Eleanor, one of our colleagues here at OPEXEngine. The methodology for pulling the data into the benchmark engine and using it for these kind of reports is the data cleaning and verification is done by OPEXEngine. We have a whole bunch of automated programs to check metrics, as well as some manual cleaning, because we work really hard to try and present apples-to-apples comparisons. And the goal of the compensation benchmarking, this is our second year of doing it for our members, is compensation is the single largest expense of any SaaS company, running between 70 and 80% of revenue. So the goal of this reporting is to give companies comparisons in terms of expenses and productivity so that they can manage their expenses better, but also manage the most important asset that a tech company has, its human capital. I think everyone on this call, from what I've seen of the participants list, everyone's in finance. we all follow in the budgeting process generally a principle of top-down, bottom-up. You set some profitability, revenue growth goals, and then you try and work the budget from the bottom up to see how to meet those, and you may have some top-down, bottom-up manipulations or changes, and that's the budgeting process. Well, we're big believers on the benchmarking side also of the top-down, bottoms-up. So look at high-level productivity and high-level performance numbers and identify where you stand at the highest level compared to peers and market leaders, and then work your way from the bottom up to see where you can improve those kind of numbers. You need to drill down and see where you can find those improvements. So let's jump right into looking at employee productivity. And in this slide, we've broken it out in a couple of high-level ways, looking at all the SaaS companies in our database, breaking them out by public companies, by private companies, as well as hybrid companies to look at recognized revenue per employee. And, one thing that you do see is that, certainly private companies' average recognized revenue per employee is a little bit less than public companies, or significantly less, almost by 100,000, and that makes sense because, as you'll see in some of the next slides, employee productivity tends to go up as you increase revenues, but it's also affected by your business model. And then if we do the same thing in the same buckets by looking at total comp and benefits as a percentage of revenue, here there's a little bit of a difference in the sense that you can see that public companies have, as a percentage of, a bigger revenue number typically. Public companies usually are the biggest companies. Comp and benefits is around the 60% level, whereas for private companies it's about 75% of total revenue. And then when we go into recognized revenue per employee, going back to recognized revenue per employee, there is generally a nice progression of the kind of recognized revenue per employee you should see. We did see a little bit of a dip here in the 20 to 40 million, and also in some ways in the 40 to 80 million. And I think what we've seen there, and these are 2017 data and aggregations based mostly on 2016 fiscal year data, is that a large number of SaaS companies in the 20, say, to 80 million are doing a fair number of, a large amount of capital raise, and they're in the growth mode, and some of, they're preparing to get to that 100 million. And we definitely see with fast growth and with fast adding of employees, if you will, a lowering of employee productivity. Then if we look at recognized revenue per employee by average contract value, it is also interesting to see that companies selling smaller average contract values, so less than 5K, all the way up to companies selling large average contract values over 100K, that there's a general progression in terms of recognized revenue per employee. When you're selling, and it sort of is similar to what we used to say in sales is, it takes the same resource sometimes to sell a $10,000 deal as it does to sell a $100,000 deal. So it is hard and requires very tight management when you're selling high volume, low cost product in order to get the same kind of efficiencies. Now, one of the things that we're going to do here, which we haven't done before, but I'd love to invite everybody to participate, is we're going to do a quick poll and ask companies anonymously about how they feel their employee productivity is. And so just hang on one second. I'm going to jump into that. And you should see on your screen now two questions. One, do you think your company's employee productivity, revenue per employee, is above the peer benchmark, below, about average, or you don't know? And I'm not expecting that you would have seen our metrics before. And then secondly, is this a metric that your management looks at regularly? And we're starting to get some responses there. I'll present I'll give it another second or two. And if anybody has any questions about employee productivity while we're doing that, I see only about half the people have entered. So you could take a second and try and fill out the poll. Don't be embarrassed if you don't know or not sure, or if it's not a metric that your company tracks. So I'm going to end the voting so that we can move on, but give it one more second before I end that. We're up to about 3/4 of you have participated, not everyone. Okay, I'm going to end the voting so we can share the result there. I think that's up here. It's funny, I'm not seeing the results. Is everyone else? When I did this before, show. All right, okay. Do you see the results? I hope you can see them. Yep, it sounds like you can see them. I can't see them. Well, I'll have to go back and look at it later. But I can see from the data here, it's about split in terms of your company's employee productivity, split between 20% or above peer benchmarks, 16% below, 25% about average, and about 20% don't know. But whether your management looks at these metrics, about 37% said they don't do that. So I'm going to move back to the presentation, and we're going to move on. I'm going to show you some employee productivity numbers for some of the biggest public companies. So this data comes right out of our Edgar engine, and just taking pure SaaS companies with revenues between 100 and 200 million. And you can see that the average, and this is for the most recent fiscal year, the average employee productivity was 193, just under 200K. But you have a couple of companies that are over that, over 200K, including two high flyers, Qualys and Catflight Health, and then with Aptio coming in third. So if any of you from those companies are on the phone, you should congratulate yourself. And then I thought it would be interesting to compare it to sort of the granddaddy of SaaS companies over the past 10 years and look at Salesforce. And the interesting thing is, over the past 10 years, their employee productivity has been over 300,000. And even in 2016, 351. Looks like they probably added some employees in the past year, and it'd be interesting to see what it is next year. So with that, I wanted to move on to compensation and benefit expense per employee. And again, this time looking at it as a breakout between public companies, SaaS public companies, SaaS private companies, and then the fastest growth SaaS companies. And what's interesting is to notice that some of the fastest growth companies, their comp and benefits is not, particularly the highest comp and benefits out there. And of course, this is just looking at private companies in terms of the fast growth companies. And I think, these companies tend to be the most highly funded companies. And as high growth companies that are heavily venture backed probably have some of the highest chances of going public. So culture, really nice facilities, free food every single day, tends to attract some of the best employees and retains them without necessarily paying the most in compensation. But then if we look at a progression, by size, comp per person does tend to go up as revenue size increase. And then if we look at, and we'll look at soon, overall comp as a percentage of operating expense tends to stay the same. We'll see that in a second. And again, there is a slight dip here in this category, and I would say that for the past year, we have seen in this particular category a lot of fast, high growth companies, and we'll also see that some of the comp and benefits expense per employee is also associated with average contract value. But let's look at how this has changed over the past 5 years. Excuse me. Over the past 5 years, comp and benefits as a percentage of recognized revenue has really dropped, and I think that relates to increased productivity. It relates to increased automation, increased overhead, and a lot of the tools that a lot of the folks on this webinar companies sell, automation tools, productivity tools, are being used by companies so that they can keep the headcounts down and increase productivity, and is having an impact and reducing the number of employees and the cost overall. So here, if you look at total company compensation and benefits as a percentage of operating expense, you can see that even across a broad spectrum of revenue sizes, it's roughly in the 60 to 65 percentage points. And again, here, this may be more attributed to spending on growth and adding new headcount and investing in that headcount as companies are growing. But it is pretty interesting, and we've looked at some of our numbers. We're not ready to publish them, but for companies over 500 million, that roughly is holding true as well. So I'm going to do another poll here and ask folks to answer some questions also about company benefits. I think it's certainly a hot topic this year with all the discussions about health benefits, but generally, do you think that your company's total benefits per employee are going to be going up, that they're going to go down, stay the same, or you're not at that point yet, you can't say for sure? And I think most companies on a calendar year have gotten their quotes about health insurance, despite the fact that we don't exactly know what things are going to look like next year. And one of the things we're interested in seeing is, how much do you think it's going to go up by, and comparing that against companies so that everyone has a sense of what they can plan for. And then, are you changing your healthcare plan design to save costs in 2018? And again, I've only got about half the people on the webinar participating. I realize some people may be calling in through with a mobile, although you should be able to see this in mobile. If a few of you could take a minute and fill that out, we could get some of those numbers up. I've got the least participation in the third question. Are you changing your healthcare plan design to save costs in 2018? That's really saying, you've gotten the quotes on health insurance and you're looking at whether, maybe you can change things around to try and keep healthcare costs in line. Okay, I'm going to end voting, even though we only have about half of you participating now. Anyone want to join in for the last chance? Okay, I'm turning that off. Let's share the results. So it looks like certainly half of the people and a larger number participated in this question. Half of the companies are increasing. This is a small survey, but it also says that under companies' healthcare expense per employee, most people are trying to keep it under, about 25% of you are keeping it under 5%, almost 20% between 5 and 10%. And there were actually 3% of you who said your healthcare expense per employee is going to go down, and 3% said that it was going to stay the same. So with that, I'll go back to the presentation. And move down to where we were. It's one of the flaws in this particular webinar software. There we were. So now let's dig in a little bit on departmental compensation expense as a percentage of total departmental expense. And I think this is really interesting to look at year over year, and if anybody's interested in talking about some of the changes over time, contact me directly, because as I said, we've been tracking this for 10 years. But I don't know if you remember, take for example sales. A good 10, 15 years ago, comp and benefits expense in sales would be 95% of sales budget, and the rest would be travel and maybe some cell phones. Nowadays, we tend to see 75 to 80% on average, and or generally that's what we see, particularly for private companies. And the rest, there's, you've got to have your CRM system and other sales productivity tools. The biggest area that we've seen change in is marketing. So if you think marketing, comp and benefits is about, roughly 40% in this general segment. And if you look at the fastest growth companies, marketing, I think, is 35%. Comp and benefits is 35% of the marketing budget. And the rest is overhead. So if you assume about 20% overhead, and then the rest is programs. This used to be, marketing used to be about, 60% comp and benefits, almost double what it is today, and the rest would be programs and overhead. But between investment in marketing automation, marketing productivity tools, as well as, and there's spending on programs and events, but, that used to be a much bigger portion of the marketing budget as well. And then let's look at sales expense and sales compensation benefits expense for different size companies. So the blue here, which is not marked in a key, sorry about that. The blue is total sales expense per person, and the orange is total sales comp and benefits per person. And if you look at this, you can definitely see it's interesting as companies get bigger. There is less difference between the two, and I think part of that is because these tend to be older companies. These companies are investing a lot more in productivity tools, and also investing a lot more in marketing, which isn't showing up here, but in lead gen on the marketing side. So then the other area that we're tracking and looking at, and I won't go into, we've got a lot of other data around this, but going back to employee productivity, I think one of the things that's interesting to see is what percentage of new hires we're seeing out of total hiring or total employee numbers. And certainly it goes down, but I don't think it'd be interesting to look at it. It'd be interesting to look at, but I suspect that there's not any other segment that is hiring, even at companies this size, 25% of their employee base as new hires in the year. It's pretty impressive. And when you think about the competition for hiring, outsourcing, this is not including outsourcing and contract workers, this is definitely a robust sector. And these numbers, I should also mention, these numbers cover all of our participants are either U.S. companies or Canadian companies. So with that, I thought that I would just have some general conclusions, and I'd love to invite some more questions from the audience. But we definitely see going into 2018 continued and increasing competition for experienced professionals in each department, marketing, sales, R&D, finance, because the sector continues to grow, and going into 2018 there may be some restrictions due to immigration. That may not affect the Canadian companies as much, but it will continue to affect, I think, all the major tech centers we're going to see, including Toronto and Vancouver and some of the Canadian areas where we see a lot of SaaS companies coming up. And I think that competition we're seeing that it's putting upward pressure on wages, but at the same time, I think it's fairly well acknowledged that investors are really digging into operational models and looking for operational efficiencies. So the pressure to not increase costs is going to be there at the same time that you're going to have more and more competition to hire. And I think there's going to be more digging into, for those companies where you said your management's not looking at employee productivity, they're probably looking at sales productivity, and they may be looking at some form of R&D productivity. I think there's going to be more and more focus on that. And then in terms of expense management, there's lots of companies that are changing or looking at changing their comp plans based on the new RevRec rules that are coming into play, ASC 606. And I was surprised. I just saw a notice that the new tax code before Congress may have some impact, particularly for tech companies. Executive comp over $1 million is going to be affected, but also apparently in the current version, and I could be wrong, this will also affect deferred commissions. So just, certainly go to experts for more information about that. We have a question here on whether sales comp and benefits expense includes commission and incentive expense, and yes, it does. So if we go back to the sales expense, so the comp and benefits is total comp and benefits, including fixed and variable expense, and this is actuals in terms of what was paid out. And then the total expense is including everything that's within the P&L for sales expense. Stock-based comp, the sales expense includes stock-based comp. So I don't know if, so I have a question on what's a common mix of fixed-based and variable comp. We've done a whole study on that by different positions. We could talk about that separately. I don't have that in front of me, but I do happen to remember that in general, new account reps were making, I think for most revenue sizes, new account reps, fixed and variable was 50% of OTE, whereas renewal reps, especially for smaller companies, have less than 50% variable, although with fairly large companies, a lot of them are putting sales reps on a higher variable up to 50%, most likely because it's a big installed base and because of the way it's structured. But we'd have to look at, we have a whole nother report on specifics around SaaS sales, commissions, and commission rates. What I was going to do is give you a sense of the companies in our benchmarking. We have a fairly good breakout. We only include data from companies in the actual benchmarking with revenues between $1 million and about $500 million. And it's a fairly, this was the demographics for 2017's benchmarking, and a fairly good breakout between companies selling small contracts versus large contracts, although there's a little bit higher proportion towards bigger contracts. So with that, I was going to wrap up the official presentation. For those of you who are on the phone and are not benchmarking participants, we'd love to invite you into the benchmarking. And as I said, it's all SaaS B2B companies. And we have two databases, the OPEXEngine, which is the confidential, detailed benchmarking. It's a give-to-get subscription. And then we have a second database. We don't use the data in this for the benchmark engine, but this is a sort of easy-to-use way to download public company financials and drop them into a Excel spreadsheet. And the Edgar engine, the data is updated every 24 hours through a data feed from Edgar Online or Donnelly Financial Services. So with that, I've finished the overall, the major presentation part of this webinar. We're trying to keep it down to about 45 minutes today. But if anyone has any additional questions, I'd be happy to answer them, and we'd be happy to get into any more detail with anybody about their specific reports or to learn more about the benchmark engine. Does anyone have any additional questions that they want to share or get answered right now? I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat. Oh, I guess something's coming in right now, so I can, nope. Just a thank you. Well, thanks everyone. We wanted to keep it short. I know everybody's in their planning mode and it's a super busy time, so thanks very much, and feel free to reach out and contact us if you have any questions. Thanks very much. Good luck everybody with finishing up November and closing Q4 and finishing your budgeting and planning. Take care. Bye now.